Have you ever wanted to come to Israel? You might not know this, but Israel in Five was created by Meir Panim, an organization that for decades has been supporting Holocaust survivors in Israel, supporting soldiers all over this country, as well as individuals and families living beneath the poverty level. And now they are offering a raffle in honor of the upcoming holiday of Purim. The winner of this raffle will get a free trip to Israel. You'll get to explore the historical and spiritual roots of this land. You will visit communities in the south that were devastated and affected greatly on October 7th. You'll meet with soldiers. You'll visit Meir Panim centers all over this country. And my favorite part, I must say, you'll get a free tour with me, which I'm really, really excited about. So go to Israel5.org/raffle, buy raffle tickets. All the money goes to supporting Meir Panim's essential services and activities and programs here in this land. There's a clickable link in the description, and I hope to see you here. In the state of Israel, it is a very popular and common thing for groups of students to climb up the mountain of Masada before sunrise so they can see the sunrise from the top of the mountain and learn the incredible history of that mountain. But this tradition all started with one man in the 1940s. Shalom, friends. My name is Akiva Gersh with Israel in 5, where we give you everything Israel in 5 minutes. Please like and subscribe. And if you have any questions or want to keep the conversation going, please do so below in the comments. Let's back up to the 1930s. In the 1930s, Zionism was well on its way towards statehood, creating the infrastructure and the inner mechanics, so to speak, of the future state of Israel. Economics and in industry and education and organizations and institutions, arts and other things as well. It was an incredible burst of growth, but at the same time, it was a really hard time during the 1930s, specifically the later part of the 1930s, 1936 to 1939, where there was an ongoing Arab revolts against the Jews in the land of Israel, against Zionism, and the idea of the creation of a Jewish state in this land. And Jews were figuring out, what are we going to do? How are we going to overcome these challenges? The British were making it harder and harder for the Jews to go towards statehood because of the chaos that was being created by these Arab revolts. And there was one man who thought that Zionism was in danger, that maybe Jews were getting too comfortable with what they were doing and what they had done, and they weren't getting ready for what most likely was coming in the future, what lied ahead for them, and that was war. Right? He and some others knew and realized and understood and believed that the only way in the end of this process that the Jews were actually going to get a state was through war, that they would have to fight for it. Not a war that they would start, but a war that other people would start and that the Jews would have to fight. That's exactly what happened with the War of Independence that begins in 1947 and goes all the way to 1949. He saw this coming already some years before, and in 1942, he made a decision to bring a few of the youth movement leaders in the land of Israel at the time. Youth movements back then and today as well are very, very important in Israeli society. Kids choose a different movement that's in line with their political thinking and religious outlook, and it really helps them to become strong individuals and leaders and eventually take part and play an important role in Israeli society as a whole. In 1942, Shlomo Guttman, I'm not sure if I said his name yet, but if I didn't, that's his name, Shlomo Guttman. He had this idea to bring some of the leaders of these youth movements to the top of Masada and teach them about the story there, teach them the history. But he didn't just want to go right up the mountain. He had them hiking through the desert for days on their way to Masada. So he made it into like a week-long desert seminar. And he walked them through the desert, teaching them along the way. And eventually they get to Masada. And they spend a few days on top of Masada, learning about the story 2,000 years before. The Jews, who there was a kind of like the last standhold, last holding place, a place of standing up against the Romans under the Roman rule. A few years after Jerusalem and the temple that stood there were destroyed by the Romans. And we know the story of Masada. We actually have another video about it where the Jews were standing up to the Romans, and in the end, they took their lives. Instead of the Romans taking them and killing them and selling them into slavery, the Jews who were there, about almost 1,000 of them, collectively decided to take their own lives instead of giving the Romans the joy of defeating them. Shlomo Guttman is teaching these youth movement leaders this story in depth on top of Masada. And he basically has one message for them. He has one message. He said their story back then could not be our story today. The choices that they had back then, either fight and get defeated or take your lives, could not be our choices today. We have to learn from their courage. We have to learn from their passion. We have to be inspired by the fact that they stood up until the end. But our story can't end in death. Our story must end in life. We must take their conviction and use it to fight, be willing to fight so that we live. And that was the message that Shlomo Guttman gave over to these youth movement leaders. Well, guess what? Those youth movement leaders brought it back to their youth movements and taught their participants, their kids, their youth, their teens, that same message. They eventually brought groups of youth to the Masada mountain and told them the same story and gave them the same lesson and share with them the same message. And eventually that kept happening until hundreds and then thousands and then eventually tens of thousands of youth living in this land came to Masada, heard that message, and were inspired and ready to fight a war that they knew was going to come, which again, it did in 1947. But that really became the spirit of the youth in the land of Israel, in the state of Israel, after statehood. And that's the reason why it became such a strong tradition until this day for school groups and youth movements to come to Masada, to hike up early in the morning when it's still dark, get up to the top of the mountain to see a beautiful sunrise over the mountains across the Dead Sea, and then spend hours up there hearing the story, hearing the lesson, hearing the message.